Snow don't care if you're pretty or kind or just turned 55. Elizabeth Calloway knew this the moment her boots broke through the crust of ice and sank into the white depths. The wind screamed like a wounded coyote, pushing her shawl off her shoulders and biting into skin already raw from the journey. Her thin gloves, wool once now threadbare, clung to her fingers like damp paper. Every breath she took came back sharp and dry, cracking at the edges of her ribs. The town had spat her out less than 2 hours ago. They hadn't even let her finish her tea. Too old, the man had said. Saul McKinnon, tall, smug, thick with self-importance and reeking of whiskey. He'd taken one glance at her from the porch, her suitcase still at her feet, and waved her off like smoke in his face. Ain't no use marrying a woman who'll croak before the winter thaws. His friends had laughed, his brothers snorted. Even the preacher standing there beside him with a half-hearted Bible in hand turned away, muttering something about God's will. She hadn't cried then. Not when they tossed her trunk into the snow like a sack of flour. Not when Saul's young daughter, barely 20 and already mean around the mouth, spit on the ground near her boots and called her dusty. Not even when the driver of the stagecoach shrugged, said, "Ain't got no business taking you back, ma'am," and flicked the reins. But now, with the wind flaying the flesh from her bones and the land stretching out endless and uncaring, her resolve frayed like the hem of her dress. Each step away from town felt heavier. She hadn't planned for this, had no map, no money, no destination. She had come west chasing the last chance at belonging, and it had slammed the door in her face. Her legs buckled and she dropped to her knees. Snowflakes clung to her lashes, turning the world around her into a slow-falling blur. Her suitcase had broken a mile back, its contents scattered in the snow. A Bible, a photo of her late husband Henry, a jar of jam she'd made for the children she'd hoped to mother. All gone. Elizabeth closed her eyes. Henry's face appeared in the darkness, round and kind, eyes crinkled at the corners. He'd always called her his North Star, even as illness dimmed his light. "You still shining, Lizzie?" he'd whisper when the fever came. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to rise to her feet and keep going, but the storm pressed harder. Now, and the numbness in her fingers told her the truth. She wasn't shining, she was fading. Still, she pushed forward. Not for long. The wind howled louder, and her body lost track of its own boundaries. Fingers felt like wood. Her feet were just dead weights, dragging behind her. There was no road now, only drifts, and the skeletal remains of trees, stripped bare by the season. Something. Ahead, a shape, maybe a shack, maybe just a hallucination, tilted in the distance. She forced herself toward it. Crawling now, her body gave up on dignity, it only knew survival. She dragged herself to the crooked wooden door, more instinct than effort. She didn't knock, just slumped against it, hoping for shelter, for anything, and then everything went black. A voice cracked through the void. "You still alive, lady?" Rough, not unkind. Male. Close. She couldn't respond. Her throat had frozen shut. The voice came again. "Damn fool thing to be out here alone." Strong hands, real, not imagined, wrapped around her arms, lifted her. A grunt of effort. A door creaked open, wood groaned beneath boots. Heat licked her cheeks, fire. It smelled like pine and smoke and dust. The man laid her on something soft, a cot maybe. Her vision swam. He muttered to himself, pulling off her gloves, her boots, wrapping her feet in something warm. She heard water boil, a cup pressed to her lips. Drink, she sipped. Bitter. Burned her throat. Tea or something like it. Then nothing again. When she woke, it was dark. The fire crackled in a small stone hearth, throwing shadows across rough-hewn walls. The cabin was small, just one room with a cot, a rocking chair, a table that looked like it had seen better years. And him. He stood near the window, rifle across his back, watching her like she might sprout horns. "Name's Daniel Reeves," he said finally. "Found you belly down in the snow, not 10 steps from my woodshed." Elizabeth sat up slowly. Her head spun. "I thank you." He nodded once. "What in hell were you doing out there? Ain't fit for a fox, let alone a woman alone." She cleared her throat. I was dismissed. That made him snort. You a school teacher or something? She shook her head. Mail order bride. His brow lifted. You don't say. I came to marry Saul McKinnon. Daniel's mouth flattened into a grim line. Saul's a damn jackass. Should have been kicked into a well years ago. Elizabeth almost smiled. Almost. He told me I was too old, Daniel huffed. Well, he ain't wrong about one thing. Her heart clenched. Which one? He's a jackass, she laughed. Just a small sound, quick and sharp, but real. It startled them both. I don't got much, Daniel continued, turning back to the fire. Cabin leaks. Kids are a handful. Work's backbreaking. But you can stay the night, maybe two. After that, he let the rest hang in the air like smoke. She nodded. Thank you. They sat in silence. She watched the fire. He watched the door. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote yowled. I never planned to come back from this, she said softly. Daniel didn't answer. I thought maybe the snow would just... Take me, quiet, no fuss. He poked the fire. Could have let it. Why didn't you? Didn't seem right. She looked at him fully now. Lean frame, worn jacket patched at the shoulders, eyes like river stones. Gray, cold, but not cruel. There are still good men in this world, she said. I ain't one of 'em, he muttered. I've known worse. Another silence. Eventually he asked, What's your name? Eliza, Elizabeth Calloway. He nodded once, thoughtful. Outside, the wind moaned against the walls, but inside the fire kept them warm. You hungry? He asked suddenly, moving. Toward a shelf. She blinked. Yes. Starving. He handed her a tin of beans. Ain't no roast chicken, but it'll keep you standing. She accepted it gratefully, warming her hands on the sides. They ate without speaking, the scrape of spoons and the crackle of fire their only company. Later, as she laid back on the cot and stared up at the wooden beams above, Elizabeth whispered to no one in particular, Maybe there's still something left for me out here. Daniel didn't reply. But he didn't leave the room either, and that somehow felt like hope. The fire burned low, the snow outside kept falling, but the storm had lost its teeth. The cabin creaked under the weight of morning. Pale light filtered through frost-laced windows, casting long silver shadows across the wooden floor. Elizabeth stirred on the cot, stiff from sleep and soreness, and for a long moment she lay still, listening. No wind, no howling, just the pop and hiss of dying embers in the hearth. She sat up slowly. Her body ached like it had been dragged through the woods by a horse. Still, she was alive, and that counted for something. A low clatter came from behind the door, hoofbeats, a shovel scraping frozen earth. She pulled the wool blanket closer and rose, moving gingerly to the window. Outside, Daniel Reeves chopped at a stubborn patch of ice, breath steaming in the crisp air. He moved with the stubborn rhythm of a man used to doing everything alone, sharp, efficient, silent. The door opened before she could retreat. Daniel stepped in, stomping snow from his boots. His eyes flicked to her and then back to the stove. You look better, he said. I feel worse. He grunted and tossed a small bundle of kindling into the stove. You'll live. Elizabeth eyed him carefully. Broad shoulders, sunburnt neck, beard peppered with grey. Not old, but not young either. He had a farmer's hands. Rough, split, at the knuckles. A man shaped by work and worry. Do you live out here alone? She asked. He didn't look up. Me, the kids, a mule that's too stubborn to die. Her brows lifted. Kids? They're still sleeping. She nodded, trying to picture it. A father raising children in this harsh corner of the world, alone, with nothing but a leaky roof and a rifle. Your wife? She asked quietly. Dead. Fever last spring. He stirred the pot on the stove. Slow and deliberate. Took her fast, buried her under the aspen tree. I'm sorry. He didn't respond. They sat in silence again, broken only by the low bubbling of something edible on the stove. Elizabeth wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders. I'll work for my keep, she said. I don't expect charity. Daniel turned his head just enough to look at her. Work? I can cook, mend, wash, even chop wood if you've got a dull axe and some patience. He let out a short laugh, almost involuntary. You'll find out quick. Out here, patience ain't. Optional. She allowed herself a small smile. Then I'm already ahead of the game. A creak from the back room interrupted them. Two small figures emerged. One girl, tall for her age, with sharp brown eyes and a braid halfway undone. The other, a boy barely out of toddlerhood, clutching a wooden horse to his chest. Clara. Tommy, Daniel said. This here's Miss Calloway, she's staying a bit. The children stared. Neither spoke. Elizabeth lowered herself to their level, careful not to move too fast. Good morning, she said gently. Your father was kind enough to rescue me from the cold. Clara tilted her head, unimpressed. You look like a ghost. Tommy blinked up at her. Are you? Elizabeth smiled. Not yet, sweetheart. Though I gave it a fair shot. Daniel cleared his throat. Eat, both of you. They sat at the table and Elizabeth joined them. The stew was thin, mostly root vegetables and beans, but it was warm and seasoned with something that hinted at care. The children ate quietly. Clara watched Elizabeth with the wary sharpness of someone used to people disappearing. After breakfast, Elizabeth gathered the bowls and began to wash them in the tin basin without asking. Daniel watched her, but said nothing. You don't have to, he finally muttered. I know. That's why it matters, he didn't argue. The day passed in slow rhythm. Daniel went out to check traps and fences. Elizabeth stayed inside with the children. Clara sat by the window carving notches into a stick. Tommy wandered between rooms, dragging his wooden horse behind him. Elizabeth mended a tear in the curtain, humming quietly. The quiet grew less heavy. In the afternoon, she taught Clara how to make cornbread, showing her how to mix with her hands and test the heat with a drop of batter. Clara didn't smile, but her eyes softened. Tommy handed Elizabeth a pine cone, serious as a preacher. You can keep it, he said. It's magic. Is it now? She asked. He nodded. Keeps you from freezing. Well then, she said, tucking it into her apron pocket. I owe you my life. By sunset, the cabin felt warmer, though the fire hadn't changed. Daniel returned with a few rabbits slung over his shoulder. He blinked when he saw the children sitting close to Elizabeth, Tommy on her lap. Didn't expect you to stay inside all day, he said. She shrugged. Didn't expect to live. He grunted, but there was less edge to it. That night, after the children had gone to sleep, Daniel stood by the door with his arms crossed, watching the stars through the window. Elizabeth stitched in the rocking chair, candlelight flickering. Over her face, you got family? He asked, voice low. No, she replied, not anymore. Henry, my husband, passed 3 years ago. Consumption. We had no children. I was a seamstress back east until I was too old for customers to care. He nodded. World's not kind to women with miles on them. It's not kind to anyone, she said. But women get blamed for weather in it. He gave a short chuckle. Ain't that the truth? A log cracked in the fire. Silence settled again. I wasn't planning to stay, she said softly. This was supposed to be a stop, a last chance. I didn't ask you to stay. She looked up at him. But you didn't let me freeze either. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. That was just decency. And decency's mighty rare these days. He turned toward her, the shadows playing across his face. I ain't looking for a replacement. She met his gaze evenly. And I'm not looking to be one. They held the moment between them, like a fragile branch. Then he nodded and turned away. Rest. You'll need your strength. Elizabeth blew out the candle. The room darkened. In the night, she heard footsteps, tiny ones. Tommy climbed onto her cot without a word and curled into her side. His little fingers wrapped around hers like he'd done it 100 times before. She didn't push him away. The next morning came with pale gold light and frost on the windows. Elizabeth rose early, stoked the fire, and started breakfast before Daniel stirred. The children didn't need waking. Daniel entered, paused at the sight of her bustling around the stove, then rubbed his eyes. You make a habit of taking over strangers' kitchens? She poured him coffee. Only when they're doing a poor job of it. He sipped, raised an eyebrow. Better than mine. Of course it is. He almost smiled. As they ate, a knock came at the door, sharp and fast. Daniel moved to it, rifle already in hand. Outside stood a man in a dusted coat, face hard, breath fogging in the cold. "Trouble?" Daniel asked, stepping outside. The man lowered his voice, but Elizabeth caught the words through the crack in the door. "Bandits seen by the ridge. 5, maybe 6, armed. Folks say they're headed south." Daniel swore under his breath. "How long?" "No one knows. But you best keep that rifle close. You've got kids." The man tipped his hat and left. Daniel shut the door, locking it behind him. Elizabeth looked up from the table. "Should I be worried?" He didn't answer right away. He stared at the door, then at the fire. Maybe. Clara went still. Tommy kept chewing his bread, unaware. Elizabeth set down her fork. "Then teach me to shoot." Daniel turned to her slowly. "You ever handled a rifle?" "No, but I can learn." "You'd fight?" "If I have to." He studied her, long and hard. Then he nodded once. "I'll show you after chores." The children watched in silence. The room felt colder now, the fire too small for the shadows creeping in. But Elizabeth sat straighter. She wasn't a ghost anymore. She was a woman, with something left to give, and she wasn't going anywhere. The lesson started with cold fingers and a borrowed rifle. Daniel stood beside her in the clearing behind the cabin, his breath white in the crisp air. The world was quiet, but alert. Like even the trees knew danger lingered somewhere close. Elizabeth wrapped her scarf tighter and took the rifle into her hands. It felt heavier than it looked, all iron and consequence. "Don't aim unless you're ready to kill," Daniel said, voice even. "This ain't a game, and there's no second shot if you hesitate." "I don't intend to hesitate." He studied her as she squared her stance. Something about her posture had changed in the last few days. She stood with the kind of weight that came from having nothing left to lose and something new to protect. He showed her how to brace the butt against her shoulder, how to sight down the barrel, how to breathe just before the trigger. Her first shot missed the log completely, sent a bird flapping from a nearby tree. The second chipped bark. The third hit home. "Not bad," he muttered. "Could be cleaner." "I'm not trying to win a trophy, Daniel." "No," he said. "So you're trying to survive." Back at the cabin, Clara peeked through the window, watching every motion. Tommy sat on the floor with his wooden horse, talking to it in hushed tones about bandits and brave ladies with rifles. They practiced until dusk. Daniel was a hard teacher, but not unkind. He corrected without belittling, pushed her without breaking. Her spirit. When the sun dipped below the ridge, turning the snow golden violet, he finally nodded. "That's enough for today." Elizabeth handed the rifle back. Her arms ached, and the cold had found its way into her bones, but something inside her was warmer than it had been in years. That night, the wind picked up again. It whispered against the cabin walls like a warning. Elizabeth sat by the fire, with Clara curled beside her, a half-knitted scarf in her lap. Daniel cleaned his rifle across the room, silent and methodical. "Do you think they'll come tonight?" Clara asked softly. Daniel didn't look up. "Maybe." Elizabeth reached for the girl's hand. "If they do, they'll find a fight waiting." Clara looked up at her. "You're not scared?" "I'm scared every minute," she said, "but that doesn't mean I'll run." The fire crackled louder for a moment, spitting sparks into the chimney. Daniel set the rifle down and stood stretching. He moved to the window and peered out into the night. "Lantern," he said. Elizabeth handed it to him without question. He opened the door just long enough to hang it on the hook outside, the weak flame barely visible in the blowing snow. A signal, not just light, but a message to anyone watching. Someone's home, someone's armed. They kept watch in shifts. Elizabeth took the first, sitting by the window with the rifle in her lap, ears straining for anything beyond the moan of the wind. She remembered her old life, the evenings of tea and mending, the polite company of women who talked about curtains and cousins and church bake sales. That world felt like a memory belonging to someone else. Daniel took the second watch. She barely slept, half listening to the creak of floorboards and his slow steps across the room. It wasn't fear that kept her up, it was readiness. The attack came just before dawn. The sound woke her first, not the scream of wind, but a footstep where none should be. Then a second. Wood creaked under weight. Daniel was already moving, grabbing his rifle, motioning for her to stay low. She did, but her hand wrapped tight around the gun beside her. A pane of glass shattered. Tommy screamed. Clara bolted upright. Elizabeth moved without thinking, pulling the children to the corner of the room as Daniel kicked over the table for cover. Gunfire cracked outside, loud, jarring, cruel. Shadows moved just beyond the light of the lantern. A bullet splintered. The doorframe. Daniel fired back, teeth gritted, eyes sharp with fury. 4 of them, he shouted. Maybe 5. Elizabeth took position beside him. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady. She sighted down the barrel and waited. The door shook under pressure. A shoulder slammed against it. Then again, the hinges groaned. Elizabeth fired once through the broken window. A cry followed. A body dropped into the snow. Daniel glanced at her. Nice. Don't get sentimental. Another shot rang out. The door burst inward. A man lunged through, wild-eyed and stinking of whiskey. Elizabeth fired again. The bullet caught his shoulder, spinning him backward. Daniel finished him with a second shot. The cabin filled with smoke and noise. The children cowered behind the overturned chairs, eyes wide but silent. Elizabeth reloaded with trembling fingers, barely noticing the blood splatter on her skirt. One more bandit made it inside. He swung a knife at Daniel, who ducked and tackled him to the floor. They struggled, grunting, crashing into the table legs. Elizabeth moved in, grabbed a skillet from the stove and brought it down hard across the man's head. He went limp. Hell of a swing. Daniel gasped. Didn't have a shot. Outside, silence returned. Then the sound of retreating footsteps. 2 men running for the woods. Daniel staggered to the door and fired one last time into the snow. He didn't chase them. Just stood there, chest heaving, as the dawn finally broke through the clouds. Elizabeth sat down slowly. Her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. Tommy ran to her, sobbing. She caught him, held him tight, whispering nonsense words to keep her own tears from falling. Clara looked at Daniel. They're gone? For now. Elizabeth looked at the 2 bodies sprawled in the snow, one inside, one half out the broken door. The scent of gunpowder hung thick in the air, mixing with blood and cold. We'll need to bury them, she said. Before the wolves come. Daniel nodded. Yeah, we will. They worked all morning in silence. Elizabeth dug with numb hands, her sleeves rolled up, dress stained and torn. Daniel didn't stop her. They buried the men far from the cabin, under unmarked stones. Afterward, Elizabeth cleaned the blood from the floor while Daniel boarded the windows. The children didn't speak much, but Clara stuck close to Elizabeth's side, helping patch. The curtains? Fetch nails, carry water. By evening, the worst of the wreckage had been cleared. They ate in silence. The fire was too small again, the walls too thin. When the children had gone to bed, Daniel poured them each a drink, cheap whiskey from a hidden bottle. Elizabeth took it with a quiet nod. You held your own, he said. I had something to lose. He sat heavily in the chair across from her. They'll come back, or others will. That's the world out here. I know. We can't do this again. Not like that. She met his eyes. Then let's not do it alone, he blinked. You mean... I mean marry me, Daniel. Not for love, not yet. But for these children, for this roof, for survival. He stared into the fire for a long time. I ain't much of a prize, he said at last. Neither am I. But I've got 2 strong hands and no intention of dying any time soon. He took another drink. Then he looked at her, really looked at her. I've seen men fall in love for worse reasons. Then let's give 'em better ones. He nodded, just once. And in that small, quiet motion, a life began. Outside, the snow stopped falling. The air stilled. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted. They sat beside the fire, 2 survivors of a night that should have broken them, and didn't. The snow had begun to melt in thin, reluctant patches along the ridge when the letter arrived. Daniel brought it in from town, folded twice and sealed in a smudge of wax, carried in his coat like something half sacred, half suspicious. He dropped it on the table between them without a word, his face unreadable. Elizabeth stared at it, heart stalling, just slightly. She hadn't seen her name written in ink in months. Eliza Calloway, it said in tight, practical script. Nothing more. She picked it up, broke the seal, and unfolded the page. One paragraph, brief, formal, and unkind in its precision. Saul. McKinnon had been shot dead in a card game. No heirs, no kin, no claimants to his property or the small patch of land he'd owned near Dry Creek. As his once intended, she had the right to it, if she came and signed the paperwork. If she returned, Elizabeth folded the letter slowly. Her hands did not shake. Her expression did not change. Daniel watched her. He said nothing. That night, after the children had gone to sleep and the fire was burning low, she sat beside him on the front porch, the stars hard and sharp above. "I thought I'd never have to see that place again," she said. "You don't," he replied. "But if I don't, the land will get swallowed up. Someone will take it. Probably one of those same fools who watched me get thrown out and didn't lift a hand." Daniel took a slow pull from the bottle between them. "Is it worth going back?" "I don't know. But I think I have to. I need to close the door myself, not just let it swing in the wind." He nodded, then offered her the bottle. She took it, drank, and handed it back. "I'll come with you," he said. "You don't have to." I didn't have to pull you from the snow either, but I did. A few days later, they hitched the wagon, bundled the children, and rode out. The mountains watched them pass, silent and vast, old as sorrow. Tommy rode in the back beside the supplies, playing with his wooden horse. Clara sat beside Elizabeth, sharp-eyed and alert, her braid tucked tight beneath a scarf. The town hadn't changed much. Dry Creek was still a crooked scar across the land, 3 streets, a saloon, a general store, and the courthouse that leaned a little to the left, like it was tired of judging people. They arrived just after noon. Folks on the porch of the saloon paused their drinks and stared. One man spat tobacco into the dirt and muttered something under his breath. Elizabeth caught the shape of the word, witch. She smiled. Inside the courthouse, a clerk with thinning hair and ink-stained cuffs handed her the papers. She signed them without ceremony. "Didn't expect to see you back," he said. "I never really left," she replied. "I just changed direction." As they left the building, a familiar voice called her name. "Miss Calloway," she turned. The preacher, same coat, same expression of distant obligation. He hurried across the street, hat clutched to his chest. I heard you'd returned. I wanted to apologize for that day." "You mean the day I was abandoned like a stray mutt in a snowstorm?" He winced. "Yes. I should have said something. Should have stepped in. You didn't. I regret it." "Regret's cheap," she said. "Action costs more. I see you've settled. With Mr. Reeves." She glanced at Daniel, who stood near the wagon, hand resting casually on his rifle, eyes scanning the crowd. A father now, a husband in all but name, steady as the land beneath his boots. "Yes," she said. "I have." The preacher hesitated. "You're not angry?" "I was. Now I'm just clear-eyed." He tried to smile. It didn't land. She turned and walked away, each step lighter than the last. They rode out to Saul's land near dusk. It was dry and wind-scrubbed, but the soil looked good. A few wild horses grazed in the distance. The shack he'd built still stood, leaning, half-rotted, but shelter of a kind. Clara helped unload supplies while Daniel inspected the perimeter. Tommy rolled in the dirt with his horse, humming a made-up song about hero mothers and brave fathers. That night, they camped beside the shack. Elizabeth stood at the edge of the land as the sun bled out behind the hills. The wind tugged at her coat. In the distance, coyotes howled. Daniel stepped beside her. "You thinking of staying?" "No," she said. "Just remembering what it felt like to be left here, powerless, small." "You don't look small now." She gave him a sidelong glance. "Flatterer." He smiled. "Only sometimes." They turned in early, the children curled together in the blankets. Daniel sat with his back against the shack wall, rifle across his knees. Elizabeth rested beside him, not quite asleep, not quite alert. The attack came fast. 3 riders. No. Warning. Guns drawn. One shouted, "That land's ours. You think you can just walk in and take what ain't yours?" Daniel was on his feet instantly, returning fire as bullets bit into the shack's rotted walls. Elizabeth grabbed the rifle from beside her and rolled behind a barrel. Clara shoved Tommy beneath a broken table and joined her mother, grabbing her hand tightly. One rider circled wide, trying to flank. Elizabeth tracked him through the gaps in the wood. Breathe, aim, squeeze. The shot caught him in the chest, sent him spinning off the horse. Another man fired back. Splinters flew. Elizabeth ducked. Daniel cursed and fired twice more. One man fell. The last turned and bolted, yelping like a dog chased off a porch. Silence crashed in. Elizabeth stood slowly. Her hands trembled, but she wasn't afraid. Just alive in the sharpest sense of the word. Clara climbed out from hiding, wide-eyed but calm. Tommy followed, cheeks streaked with dirt, still clutching his wooden horse. Daniel lowered his rifle. "You all right?" Elizabeth nodded. "We're all breathing, that's enough." They buried the bodies at the far edge of the land. No words, no prayers, just dirt and distance. The next morning, Elizabeth walked the perimeter alone. The land was sun-drenched now, soft underfoot. She knelt in the grass, pressed her palm to the soil and whispered, "I forgive you, Saul, not for his sake, for hers." When she returned to the shack, Daniel had started packing the wagon again. "You ready?" he asked. She looked once more, at the horizon, then back at the life they'd built. The children, the laughter waiting, the firelight that would meet them at home. "I am." On the ride back, the children slept in the back, heads touching. Daniel drove in silence, content. Elizabeth leaned into him, her head against his shoulder. "You think we can do this?" he asked after a while. She smiled. "We already are." They reached the cabin 2 days later. Smoke curled from the chimney before they arrived. Someone had been keeping watch. A neighbor, perhaps, or just the land itself recognizing its own. Daniel unloaded the wagon. Elizabeth ushered the children inside, peeled off coats, kissed foreheads, tucked them into their own beds. Later, she stood in the doorway and watched the light shift across the wooden floor. So many days had passed in fear, in solitude, in hunger, for meaning. Now there was something solid beneath her feet. Daniel entered behind her and wrapped an arm around her waist. "You thinking again?" he asked. "Always." He kissed her temple. "You're allowed to rest, you know." "I know," she said, "but I won't. Not yet." That night, they sat by the fire, the cabin warm and glowing. Tommy mumbled in his sleep. Clara snored quietly. The world beyond the windows had gone quiet again, but this time it didn't feel empty. Elizabeth looked into the fire and spoke softly. They called, "Me too old." Daniel stirred the coals with a poker. "Fools do that. They left me in the snow like I was nothing." "You proved otherwise," she nodded. "I did." He set the poker aside and turned to her. "You saved us all, you know." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The fire cracked. The wood sighed. Outside, the stars wheeled slow and patient above the pines. Elizabeth closed her eyes and let herself remember, not just the pain, but the fight. The rise. The children's laughter. The first time Clara had taken her hand without flinching. The moment Tommy had called her mama without thinking. They hadn't needed a bride. They hadn't needed someone young or beautiful or delicate. They'd needed her. When morning came, it arrived with a sky like burnished silver and birdsong threading through the trees. Elizabeth stood on the porch and breathed deep. Daniel joined her, coffee steaming in his hand. "What now?" he asked. She smiled. "Now," she said, "we live, and so they did." Lillian Smith Colton curled her trembling body around her swollen belly, teeth clacking from the cold. Her breaths came out in short, sharp clouds, each one thinner than the last. The wooden floor beneath her was slick with melted snow and blood. From the split in her lip, a gift from Enoch's youngest brother. She tried to lift herself, but her knees buckled, and she collapsed again into the corner, pressing her face into the scratchy hay to muffle her sobs. "Please," she whispered, not knowing if she begged God, Enoch, or the child stirring inside her. Her voice cracked raw from screaming hours earlier. She had shouted until her throat felt sanded and empty, screamed Enoch's name until it no longer sounded like a word. No one came. No one even checked. Outside, the last light of day drained into the horizon, and the world turned to shades of ash and bone. She remembered a time not long ago when Enoch used to run his hands over her belly and laugh, calling her his miracle. They had tried for years, Prayers, herbs, quiet tears after long nights of nothing. Then when it happened, when life finally took root, he turned cold. At first it was confusion. He asked questions with a false smile, too sharp around the edges. Then came the whispers to his mother and brothers. His eyes shifted, avoiding hers. By the 3rd month, he told her outright, "That ain't my child." She hadn't cheated. Not once, never even thought to. But Enoch was stubborn. Worse, he was proud. And when pride found the ears of his mother, Edna Colton, the kind of woman who saw demons behind every shadow, things turned cruel. The day they locked her in, the air had been filled with the scent of pine and burning brush. Edna stood at the doorway, holding a thick wool shawl over her chest like armor. "You've brought shame on this house, Lillian Smith. You lay with a devil, and now you bear its fruit. God's wrath'll come one way or another." Martha tried to plead with Enoch, but his face was unreadable. He didn't hit her, he didn't yell. That made it worse. He only took a deep breath and said, "I won't raise no bastard that ain't mine." Then he turned and walked away. The shed had once been a goat house, long since abandoned. They shoved her inside with only her coat, a single blanket, and a jug of water that froze within hours. The lock clicked, footsteps crunched away. No one came back. She tried the door the first night until her fingers were too numb to curl. She'd yelled the second. By the 3rd, she saved her breath. Her stomach twisted with hunger, her muscles aching from the cold. The baby kicked weakly now, like it too was fading. She sang to it, soft songs she remembered from when her mother used to comb her hair back in Missouri. That life felt 2 lifetimes ago. The darkness pressed in like hands. At times she swore she heard whispering from the walls. Once she saw a flicker of movement outside, just a coyote sniffing for warmth. Still, it was the only visitor she had. "Ain't that something?" she muttered bitterly. "Beasts got more mercy than kin." On the 4th day, she found a rusted nail in the wall. Too dull to cut anything, but sharp enough to scratch. She carved small lines into the plank beside her, 4 tallies now. "I will not die here," she told herself aloud after the 5th. "You hear me? Not like this." The cold made her mind slippery, prone to wandering. She saw Enoch's face, everywhere, in the frost patterns, in the cracked boards, in the pools of shadow at her feet. She remembered their wedding night, how his hands had shaken when he undid her buttons, the way he'd cried when her first pregnancy failed. That man was buried now beneath silence and accusation, and she didn't know how to mourn him. When the wind died down, she sometimes thought she heard voices from the house. Laughter, music maybe. They were celebrating the season, pretending she hadn't existed, pretending her child didn't exist. Edna would be making pies. The brothers would drink rye by the fire and spit her name like poison, and Enoch would sit in silence, because that's what cowards did. Her water was gone. Her lips cracked. The ache in her back had turned to burning, and her belly was taut and heavy, tighter than it had ever been. A new pain bloomed low in her gut, sharp, twisting. She tried to breathe through it, but the cramps came faster than before. "No, no, not now," she whimpered. Too early. She clawed at the straw, forcing herself upright. But her vision spun and her limbs betrayed her. Her head slammed into the wall. The world turned grey, then black. Sometime later, minutes, hours, she couldn't tell, she woke to silence. A deathly, total silence. Her body was slick with sweat despite the cold, and the pain had settled into a rhythm. Contractions, too close together. "God help me," she croaked, voice barely audible. She began to panic. No midwife, no tools, not even rags to clean the child. She'd helped dozens of women bring life into the world. Now she was alone, lying in filth with death pressing in. She placed her hand on her belly, sobbing now. "You stay strong, little one. Mama's still here. Mama's gonna get you out. Safe." Then a sound, a creak, not wind, not rats, a boot step. Her eyes snapped to the small crack in the shed wall. Through it, a shadow passed, a silhouette against the snow. A figure, tall, on horseback. He moved slowly, as if uncertain what he was seeing. Martha froze, afraid it was one of the brothers. Maybe they'd come to finish the job. Maybe they wanted to bury her quiet and be done. The rider dismounted. He stepped closer. She couldn't make out his face, but he wore a wide-brimmed hat and a long coat dusted with snow. He crouched near the door. A hand touched the latch. Martha tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. She reached for the nail, but even that slipped from her fingers. He pressed his ear to the door. She summoned everything she had. "Help me," she rasped. It came out as a croak, barely human. There was a long pause. Then he stood back. A loud crack as he kicked the door once, then again. On the third try, the door split inward, hinges groaning. The light blinded her. The man stepped in, removing his hat. His face was weathered, unshaven, and sharp with concern. "Ma'am?" he said, voice gravelly. She blinked up at him, every inch of her body trembling. Don't touch me," she mumbled. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said quickly, kneeling. He looked around, eyes narrowing. "Lord above, who did this to you?" She didn't answer. "Couldn't. I'm Jack," he said, gentler now. "Jack McCrae. I heard the screaming last night. Came to see if wolves got into something." His eyes landed on her belly. "You're in labor," she winced. "Too soon," she whispered. He removed his coat and wrapped it around her. "Not. Have I got anything to say about it?" She finally met his gaze. There was something steady in his expression, a calm she hadn't seen in weeks. "They'll come back," she whispered. Jack glanced over his shoulder. "Then we'll be gone before." "They do." He lifted her gently. She cried out, clutching his shirt, and he murmured something she didn't catch. As he carried her out into the night, snow falling in soft spirals around them, she looked back at the shed. 5 tallies on the wall. She had lived. But the storm wasn't over yet. The blizzard hadn't yet lifted when Jack McCrae found her. Snow clung to his shoulders and filled the creases in his coat, turning him into a silent ghost riding across the open plains. He wasn't meant to be out this far, not tonight. His route back to the ranch was always east of the ridge, but something, call it instinct, call it guilt, had pulled him west, toward the tree line, toward the scream. He'd heard it through the wind the night before, distant and ragged, like a dying coyote. But there was something human in the pitch, familiar. A sound he hadn't been able to forget since his wife, Clara, died 5 years ago in a shack not unlike the one he'd just broken into. Jack dismounted near the crumpled shed, the horse shifting, nervously beneath him, nostrils flaring. Something in the air smelled wrong, like old rot and frozen blood. He stepped carefully, boots crunching through crusted snow, rifle slung across his back. When he saw her lying there, half buried in hay and dirt, he thought she might be dead. Her eyes fluttered. Not gone. Not yet. The sight of her made something twist inside him, an ache he'd buried years ago. He knelt beside her, careful not to startle her, though her limbs had no strength left to flinch. She looked like a ghost, skin pale and dry, her belly impossibly round beneath layers of rags and frostbitten cloth. "Ma'am?" he asked, leaning close. Her eyes focused for a heartbeat, then drifted. He saw the blood between her legs. Her time was coming. Maybe already here. She tried to speak. Nothing came. Jack didn't waste another second. He scooped her up, light as cracked wood, and staggered toward his horse. Her body was burning despite the cold. Fever. That or her body just trying to hold on to something it was losing too fast. He tied her across the saddle and mounted behind her, wrapping both arms around her frame. She murmured something, too, soft to understand. He leaned in. "Don't let 'em find me." That was all he needed. He rode fast and hard, cutting through the edge of the trees and over frozen hills. His small cabin lay 2 miles out, hidden among bent pines and broken dreams. The storm chased them the whole way, clawing at his back, snarling through the trees like it knew it had been cheated of its prize. By the time he reached his cabin, the world had gone steel gray. He kicked the door open and carried her inside, laying her on the cot near the stove. The fire had long since died. He cursed under his breath and threw kindling into the hearth, striking the flint until sparks caught. The flames crackled to life, casting flickering shadows across the walls. He stripped off her outer coat, careful not to expose her too much, and covered her in every blanket he owned. She groaned, curling slightly on her side. Her breath hitched. Another contraction. Jack grabbed the kettle and set it to boil, then rummaged through the chest beneath his bed for anything resembling clean cloth. He hadn't been prepared for this. Not again. The last time he'd delivered a child, it had ended in silence. Clara had bled out while he watched, helpless, holding a lifeless baby in his shaking arms. That memory surged forward like a tide, threatening to pull him under. But this wasn't the same. He wouldn't let it be. She opened her eyes again, clearer this time, and met his gaze. There was fear there, but also recognition, a flicker of trust. "Name's Jack," he said softly, placing a cup of water by her mouth. She sipped, barely able to hold it herself. "You got a name?" "Martha," she whispered. "Lillian. Smith Colton." "All right, Martha. You're safe now. Nobody's gonna hurt you, but you gotta stay with me, all right?" She gave a small nod, then winced as another contraction hit. Her face twisted with pain, jaw clenched. Jack sat by her side, dipping a cloth in warm water and wiping her brow. "Tell me what they did." She hesitated, then spoke through clenched teeth. "They locked me in that shed, said I was carrying the devil's child. My husband said it wasn't his." Jack's expression hardened. He didn't need to ask who they were. The West was full of people who wore family like armor and used it like a weapon. He took her hand, rough and cracked but still warm. "Well, they were wrong, you hear me? That baby's yours, that's all that matters." Martha's eyes welled up. She gritted her teeth, and her body arched with the next wave of pain. Jack steadied her, helped her breathe. The contractions were getting closer, minutes apart now. The baby was coming, and fast. He gathered what little supplies he had: a worn leather satchel with dried herbs, a dull knife, strips of cloth from his old shirts. It wasn't much, but it had to be enough. Through groans and gritted curses, Martha fought to bring her child into the world. Jack guided her with the same calm he'd once reserved for cattle drives and gunfights, though his hands trembled. At times her cries shook the cabin walls. At others she bit her lip until it bled, face slick with sweat and tears. Then came the moment. The baby was Breach. Jack cursed again, his face pale. He'd seen it once before, Clara's baby. He nearly froze. "No," he muttered, "not again." He guided the child carefully, coaxing it out with whispered instructions, ignoring the bile rising in his throat. Martha screamed, eyes wide and glassy. The fire roared louder, as if it could drown the sound. And then, life. A tiny, gasping wail cut through the cabin. Jack fell back, stunned. The baby was small but strong, red-faced and squirming. A girl. Martha collapsed back into the blankets, chest heaving. "Is she—" "She's here," Jack said. "She's perfect." He cleaned. The child wrapped her in cloth and placed her in Martha's arms. The woman stared at the bundle, as if she couldn't believe it. Her fingers traced the baby's cheek, eyes shining with something between relief and awe. "I thought we'd die out there," she whispered. Jack looked away. "You almost did." They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the pop of the fire and the soft cooing of the newborn. Eventually Martha asked, "Why'd you come?" Jack leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling. "My wife died alone in a place like that. I didn't get there in time. I still hear her voice sometimes. So when I heard yours," he let the thought hang. "I figured I owed the world one good turn." Martha looked at him for a long time. "You saved us." He shook his head. "You did the hard part. I just broke a door." She laughed, weak and hoarse, but genuine. It filled the space like sunlight. Jack glanced at the window. The storm had started to ease, but something else stirred on the edge of the world, a sense he'd not be alone in this fight. "We can't stay here long," he said. "They'll come looking," Martha nodded. "They always do." He met her eyes. "Then we ride before they find you again. I know a place. Quiet, safe. You and the little one can rest. After that, we'll figure it out." Martha looked down at the sleeping child nestled in her arms. "Her name's Hope," she said, voice steady. Jack smiled faintly. Fitting. From outside, in the distance, came the faint echo of hooves on hard snow. Jack's smile faded. He rose slowly and stepped to the window. Dark figures crept along the ridge, 3 riders, maybe 4, headed straight for the cabin. He turned back, already reaching for his rifle. We're out of time. Martha didn't flinch. She adjusted the baby in her arms, eyes sharp. Then let's finish what they started. Snow flurried down like ash from a dying sky as Jack McRae packed saddlebags with trembling urgency. The baby, Hope, slept wrapped. Tight in Martha's shawl, her breath faint, her face a soft pink against her mother's chest. Martha stood despite the weight of childbirth and the fever that still clung to her skin. Her face was pale, but her eyes were lit by something brighter than fear. Survival had become defiance, and she wasn't going to die a second time. Jack's fingers fumbled with the saddle straps. They're coming fast, he said, voice low but clipped. 4, maybe 5. They know this terrain. We don't have time to ride far. Martha stepped toward him barefoot on the frozen floorboards. Then we don't ride. We make them come to us. Jack looked at her. Really looked. The pain had stripped her down to something elemental. She wasn't the trembling woman he'd carried. From that shed, she was a mother now, a woman with everything to lose and no more illusions about mercy. He nodded. We'll hold them here long as we can. I've held babies in one hand and bleeding men in the other. This won't be the first time I've fought for someone I love. Jack handed her a revolver, light and cold in her palm. She weighed it like she'd used one before. You know how to shoot? My father taught me before I learned to milk a cow. The first shot echoed across the hills like thunder. A warning. A message. Jack shoved the door closed and slid the iron bolt into place. The fire crackled low. They'd left the lanterns off, didn't want to give anyone an easy target. He checked the windows, adjusted the old shutters. One was loose. He wedged an axe handle against it. Then came the voices. Drunken, mean, too loud to be sober. Come out, Jack, one shouted. We just want what's ours. Jack peered through a crack. Enoch Colton sat on a thick brown horse, flanked by 2 brothers and a ranch hand Jack didn't recognize. They had rifles slung across their chests and eyes that burned meaner than the cold wind. Martha was already moving. She'd swaddled Hope in every warm cloth she could find, placing her in a makeshift cradle beneath the table in the kitchen's farthest corner. Jack turned to her. If they get in, they won't, she said. But if they do, you run with her. I'm not leaving you. You already saved me once. Don't waste it. Outside, the voices grew louder. Boots crunched against icy ground. How you think that baby's gonna live long, Martha? Enoch's voice was thick with mockery. You think that bastard child of yours is gonna be welcome anywhere out here? She stepped to the window. She don't need to be welcome, she called out. She just needs to live. The cabin fell silent for a breath. Then a shot slammed into the wall, splitting a plank inches from Martha's head. Jack yanked her down, pressing her against the floor. Stay low. More shots followed. The brothers hollered, laughing, trying to rattle them. But Jack didn't flinch. He waited until a shadow passed close to the edge of the porch, then fired. The man screamed and went down. That's one, Jack muttered. The others scattered, ducking behind tree trunks and rocks. The ranch hand fired back, his shot breaking a window. Glass rained down over the hearth. Martha scooped up a shard and held it like a dagger. Jack moved fast, crossing to the kitchen window. He saw one of the brothers inching forward, trying to flank the cabin. He raised his rifle, took aim, and dropped the man with a clean shot to the thigh. He won't walk right again, Jack said, loading another round. The fire inside was burning low. The shadows lengthened, flickering across the floor like ghost limbs. Martha crawled to the baby and checked her. Hope stirred but didn't cry, too cold. Too weak. We need to end this fast, Martha said. They won't back down. They never do. Another bottle came sailing through the broken window. Flames burst across the floor. A Molotov, crude but deadly. The fire caught on the rug, licking up the leg of the table. Jack grabbed the water bucket and doused the flame, steam rising in a hiss. Martha's voice was calm, but urgent. We have to move her. They'll burn this place down. Jack nodded, shouldering his rifle. There's a trail north of here, through the canyon. Tight pass, too narrow for horses. We take her there. And if they follow, we make... Sure they don't. He gathered what little they had. 2 packs, a wrapped blanket for the baby, a hunting knife, spare bullets. Martha tucked the revolver into her waistband. Her steps were shaky, but she didn't stumble. Pain slowed her, but didn't stop her. They kicked open the back door and vanished into the trees just as another bottle shattered behind them. Fire roared through the cabin. The trail was narrow, cut between steep rocks, snow crunching beneath their boots. Jack carried the baby, cradled against his chest. Martha followed, every breath a fight. Her hands bled from gripping the sharp branches for balance. Behind them, hooves pounded. "They're coming," she said. Jack picked up speed. "There's a cut ahead. A mine. We can hide there, block the entrance, but won't they know? Probably, but it'll buy us time." They reached the entrance just as the first horse appeared behind them. Jack pulled Martha inside, ducking into the darkness. He found a rusted chain once used for dragging carts and looped it around a fallen timber. With a grunt, he hauled it across the narrow mouth of the mine. Darkness swallowed them. The cold was thicker here, still and ancient. Jack lit a match. The flickering flame revealed old beams, jagged rock, the glint of rusted tools long abandoned. He found a dry corner and laid the baby down, wrapping her tight. Martha sank to her knees, eyes fluttering. "You rest," Jack said, voice gentle. "I'll hold them off," but she grabbed his arm. "If they get through, don't let them take her." "They won't. You promise me, Jack. I swear it." The voices returned, echoing off the rocks. Enoch's rage had turned ugly. "Now, you think you can hide from me in the dark, you son of a bitch?" Jack aimed through a gap in the timber. "You burned my home. You took my wife." Jack's voice was flat. "You threw her in a shed to die." A pause, then a gunshot. Splinters flew. Jack fired back. The tunnel lit up in bursts of light. One of the brothers charged. Jack hit him in the shoulder, sent him screaming back into the snow. The others flanked. Jack ducked, dragged a beam down to narrow the entrance further. Martha stood, legs shaking. "You'll need help." "No. Stay with her." "I can shoot." "I know. But you're the only one she knows." "If I fall—" She hesitated, then nodded. More bullets. The echoes rang like iron bells. Jack fired, missed, fired again. Caught a figure in the gut. The man dropped. 3 left. "I just want the baby," Enoch screamed. "Give me the child and—" "We'll leave you be." Jack laughed bitterly. "You left her mother to rot. You don't get a second chance. You don't understand," Enoch snarled. "This ain't about right and wrong. It's about legacy. Then let it end with you." Silence fell. Then a new sound. A crack of rock above. The blast of a rifle, then screaming. One of the brothers had climbed the ridge and triggered a slide. Snow and boulders thundered down the trail. Jack grabbed the baby, pulled Martha back. The avalanche blocked the path, cutting off the mine. Silence again. No more voices. Jack waited, rifle raised, listening. Nothing moved. Finally, he stepped outside, slowly, rifle first. Bodies lay scattered. 2 men still breathing, groaning in the snow. The others gone or buried. Enoch stood, face bloodied, rifle limp in one hand. "You think this makes you a hero?" He spat. "You stole my family." "You gave them up the moment you locked that door," Jack said. Enoch raised his rifle. Jack fired first. The bullet took him in the chest. Enoch stumbled, dropped to his knees, eyes wide with something like disbelief. He reached out, then crumpled into the snow without a sound. Jack stood over him, breathing hard. Snow settled on his shoulders like a shroud. He turned back. Martha waited just inside the mine, hope cradled against her chest. Her face was tired but calm. "It's done," she asked. Jack nodded. "They won't follow." She didn't cry. Not then. She only stepped forward and rested her forehead against his chest. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "For all of it." "You gave her a chance," Martha replied. "That's more than anyone else ever did." They stayed in the mine that night, warming by a small fire Jack built from broken beams. Hope slept between them, tiny fists curled, breath soft and steady. Jack stared into the flames, haunted but lighter than before. Martha dozed beside him, hand resting on his knee. Neither spoke, but the silence was no longer empty. And outside, The storm had finally passed. The sun rose over the town of Redemption Ridge with a soft golden light that painted the buildings in quiet hues of warmth. It was the kind of morning that lied, a picture of peace smeared over a town long used to suffering and silence. Jack McRae rode in slow, dust rising behind his horse like a fading ghost trail. Behind him, in a modest covered wagon he'd borrowed from a friend up north, Martha sat with Hope swaddled in her arms, her body still healing, her heart steady as iron. They'd ridden 3 days after the fight in the canyon. Jack had wanted to take her farther west, deeper into territory where no one would know her name, but Martha had insisted. Redemption Ridge was where she wanted to stand, not just to survive, but to be seen. She would not be a ghost. She would not vanish like so many women before her. Jack pulled up outside the sheriff's office, the porch empty, a lazy sign swinging in the breeze. He dismounted, muscles aching from the ride, and turned to help Martha down. She winced as her boots hit the dirt, but she stood tall. The child stirred against her chest and then fell quiet again. "You sure about this?" Jack asked, watching her with the cautious care of a man who had come to respect strength far more than pity. "I'm not here to beg," Martha said. "I'm here to tell the truth." They walked together into the sheriff's office, where Sheriff Declan Rourke sat behind a desk piled with papers, boots on the corner, hat tilted over his eyes. He looked up at the sound of the door creaking open and squinted through the morning light. "Well, damn," he muttered, rising. "Jack McRae, ain't seen you in years. And who've you got with you?" Jack stepped aside so Martha could move forward, shoulders square. "This is Lillian Smith Colton," he said. "She's got a story you're going to want to hear." Rourke's expression shifted. He knew the Coltons, everyone in these parts did. Enoch and his kin weren't exactly loved, but they were loud and rich in cattle. Rourke had broken up more than one barroom brawl with their name on it. Martha sat down and told everything. No tears, no trembling voice, just a steady stream of truth sharpened by pain. She told him about the child, the accusations, the shed, the cold. She told him about the moment she believed she'd die, and the man who found her when no one else would. She told of fire and snow, of rifles and blood, of justice clawed out of the dark with bare hands. When she finished, the room felt too small for silence. Rourke leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "You have any proof?" Martha turned slightly and let him see Hope's face. The child blinked sleepily, her eyes wide and curious. "I carried her through the worst winter of my life." "She's the proof," Martha said. "But if that ain't enough, you can ride out to the canyon and look under the snow. You'll find Enoch Colton face down with a bullet in his heart." Jack didn't flinch. Sheriff Rourke rubbed his jaw, uncertain. "You killed him?" Jack shrugged. "He tried to kill her. Tried to kill the baby. That makes it self-defense." The sheriff stared at them for a long while, then crossed the room and poured 3 cups of bitter coffee. "You know what'll happen if this goes public," he said. "The Coltons got friends, loud ones. The moment they find out you're alive and he ain't, they'll come after you with lawyers, guns, or worse." "I don't care," Martha said, taking the cup. "I'm not hiding anymore." "Sheriff." Rourke took a sip and muttered, "Damn fool woman's got grit." That afternoon a hearing was called. In Redemption Ridge, justice wasn't handed down in ornate courtrooms. It happened in the town hall, with townsfolk packed shoulder to shoulder, murmuring like bees in a hive. Some remembered Martha from her days as a midwife before she disappeared. Others only knew the Coltons, their cattle, their liquor, their tempers. But all of them were curious. Jack stood by the wall, arms crossed, watching the room like a man waiting for gunfire. Martha sat at the front, Hope resting in her lap. She looked small in the chair, but she didn't shrink, not once. The judge, old Lemuel Pike, a man with more patience than sentiment, listened to every word. Jack told his story. So did Rourke, who had since verified the scene in the canyon. Bodies, bullet shells, a burned-out cabin. It all added up. Then came the crowd. Enoch's cousin, slick-haired and sneering, stood up and called Martha a liar, claimed she'd been wandering mad. For years, said she was touched in the head, called the child unnatural. Martha rose to her feet, her voice ringing through the chamber. "I was left to die by men who called themselves family. And when I didn't, they tried again. If that makes me mad, then maybe we all should be." The room fell quiet. Old Lemuel tapped the gavel once. "This town has seen a lot of lies over the years, but there's one thing I know. Truth don't usually come back from the dead to tell its story." He looked over the room, then back at Martha as he dismissed. "You're free to go." Some cheered, some just nodded, but none argued. That night they stayed in the back of the general store. The owner had once lost a daughter in childbirth and said Martha could have the room for as long as she needed. Jack sat on the porch, legs stretched, rifle nearby, just in case. Martha rocked Hope slowly, watching her baby sleep. She hadn't named her before the trial, hadn't dared, but now there was no one to take it from her. "Her name is Hope," she said aloud, voice soft. Jack turned slightly, raising a brow. "Hope Colton?" "Hope McRae," she said without hesitation. Jack stared, confused. "She ain't his," Martha said, "and she never will be." Jack swallowed hard. He didn't speak, but something in his chest loosened. Morning came. They didn't leave town, not right away. Word of the trial spread fast. People came to see her, women mostly. One asked if she'd teach her how to deliver babies. Another offered to help fix up an old house near the riverbank. She had no reason to say yes, except that it felt like the first time she was building something again. Hope grew stronger by the day. Jack stayed. At first it was to make sure Martha was safe. Then it was to help her hammerboards. Then to walk with her and Hope down the trails behind town. It stopped being about protection somewhere along the way. One night as they sat by the river, watching the stars shake in the dark water, Martha turned to him. "You ever wonder why you found me?" she asked. "Because I was late the last time," he said. "Because I needed to save someone even if I couldn't save her." "You did more than save us." Jack didn't reply. But he reached out, and she took his hand. Hope gurgled, then laughed, a sound so pure and bright it made the crickets go quiet. Time passed. The town didn't forget what happened, but they accepted it. Martha became part of the fabric again. People looked her in the eye, some apologized. Most didn't need to. She wasn't looking for that anyway. She had a daughter, a home, and a man who had fought through fire and snow to bring her back. One morning, as she watched Hope toddle through the tall grass by the porch, Martha felt something rise in her chest. Not pain, not fear, just peace. She knelt and scooped Hope into her arms. "Your mama fought coyotes, men, and winter itself to bring you here," she whispered. "So you'd better grow up wild and proud and never, ever let anyone lock a door behind you." Hope looked up with curious eyes and touched Martha's cheek. Inside, Jack brewed coffee. He stepped outside and handed her a cup. "You reckon we're safe here now?" he asked. "No," she said, sipping. "But I reckon I don't care." He chuckled. "Reckon that's good enough." They stood together as the wind stirred the grass and the sky turned soft with early light. Somewhere in the distance, a horse neighed, but closer, in the arms of her mother, a girl named Hope laughed again. And the West, for once, seemed like it might forgive.